In the year 1883, the flies came before anything else. They gathered in a dark, humming cloud at the far end of Milliner Street, where the old schoolhouse had stood until the spring rains softened the clay beneath its foundation and the whole east wall folded inward like a tired man sitting down. Nobody had gone near it since. The building had been empty for 11 months. There was nothing in it worth retrieving. But flies don't gather over nothing. Elias Pruitt, who ran the assay office 3 lots down, noticed them on a Tuesday morning while unlocking his door. He watched the cloud for a moment, the way it pulsed and contracted, and then he went inside and got on with his work. He told himself it was a dog. Maybe a coyote had crawled under the collapsed wall to die. He told himself that until noon. By afternoon, he crossed the street. The smell hit him before he reached the rubble. It was the particular smell of something that had been sealed away, dense, dark, organic in a way that turned the stomach before the mind could name it. He pulled his collar over his face and crouched at the edge where the foundation had cracked open. Beneath the broken planking, beneath 2 feet of collapsed adobe and rotted beam, the earth had been disturbed, not by the collapse. The earth had been moved before the wall came down. He could see it in the way the soil was layered, dark fill packed down over pale desert caliche, the kind of digging a man does deliberately, with patience, when he wants something to stay hidden. He stood up. He didn't go closer. He walked to the jail. Sheriff Nathaniel Crow was at his desk when Pruitt came through the door, and he read the man's face before a word was spoken. Crow had that quality, the ability to absorb information from the way a person carried their body, the particular tension around their mouth. He had built a career on it. He was 41 years old. Lean and composed, with gray spreading through dark hair at the temples, and eyes that were a quiet, attentive brown. He wore his badge the way other men wore a scar, present, unremarkable, part of the face he showed the world. He set down his pen. "Talk to me, Elias," Pruitt said. Crow listened without interrupting. When it was done, he stood, took his hat from the nail by the door, and put it on with the deliberateness of a man who was not yet afraid but understood that he might need to be. "Don't say anything to anyone," he said. "Go back to your office." He walked to the schoolhouse alone. He smelled it the moment he turned the corner onto Milliner Street. He didn't break stride. At the rubble, he knelt and looked at what Pruitt had seen, the dark fill, the disturbed caliche, the way the soil layered wrong beneath the collapsed foundation. He pulled on his gloves. He moved 2 boards aside. He reached into the gap and pressed his fingers into the earth. He withdrew his hand slowly. He stood. He looked at the flies for a long moment, the way they moved against the still afternoon air, and then he turned and walked back up the street. He didn't call for the undertaker. He didn't call for a deputy. He went to the hardware store and bought 2 shovels. He went back to the schoolhouse. He dug alone for an hour before he found the first one. A child's shoe. Brown leather. Sized for a boy of perhaps 7 or 8. Still laced. He set it aside. He kept digging. By the time Josiah Fenn, his deputy, found him, Crow had uncovered 3 separate burial sites beneath the collapsed east foundation. He had not yet removed anything from the ground beyond that one shoe. He was methodical. Precise. He worked the way a man works when he's doing something that matters and he knows it can't be undone. Fenn stood at the edge of the rubble and looked in. He was 26, built wide, and not a man given to excess emotion. But he went pale. "Lord above," he said quietly. "Get the undertaker," Crow said. "Tell him to come without his wagon. Tell him to come quiet." "How many?" Crow looked at the ground. The flies were loud in the silence. "I don't know yet." They worked into the evening. 5 in total. 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, ages estimated between 6 and 10. 2 women, both adults, one considerably older than the other. The undertaker, a careful German named Brunner, worked without speaking, cataloging each finding with the concentration of a man who understood the weight of what he was handling. By the time the last lantern was lit, a small crowd had gathered at the edge of the rubble. Nobody had announced anything. Word in Drywater Ridge moved the way water moved through every crack, regardless of containment. Crow stood at the edge of the lamplight and looked at the faces watching him. He knew all of them. He had known most of them for years, since before the big strike of '79, when the Ridge was barely a camp with a name. He had watched this town grow up around him the way a man watches children grow, with pride and with a kind of fierce, inarticulate investment. He cleared his throat. "Go home," he said. Not unkindly. "This is not a thing to stand around." Most of them went. A few didn't. He didn't press. He turned back to the graves. One unsettling detail registered in the back of his mind, the way a splinter registers before you feel the pain of it: the children's hands. 2 of the 3 had been positioned with their hands folded across their chests. Not casually buried. Arranged. By the next morning, the name Silas Reed was already circulating. Crow heard it first from the barber, who mentioned it while lathering his neck. The barber said it the way people say things they want said but don't want credit for, casual, angled, as if it were common knowledge that required no particular argument. Wasn't Reed the one they dismissed from the school? Before it closed? Crow said nothing. He watched the blade in the mirror. Conduct unbecoming, they called it. Something with the children. Nobody said the full story out loud, but everyone knew well enough. People know a lot of things, Crow said. They do. He left the barber without another word. Silas Reed had lived for the past 8 months in a small stone house at the northern edge of town, near where the Mesa Road turned to switchback and climbed toward the upper claims. He had arrived in Drywater Ridge 2 years prior, recommended by a church mission out of Santa Fe, and had taught for 14 months before the complaints began. The complaints themselves had never been formally filed. Nothing had gone to paper. There had been a conversation. 3 of the mining families, Clara Whitmore who ran the boarding house and served on the informal town council, and Crow himself, and at the end of it, Reed had been asked to relinquish his position. He had done so without argument, which some took as admission and others took as dignity. He had stayed in town. Nobody had asked him to leave. Nobody had quite wanted to. Crow rode out to Reed's house at mid-morning, alone, without announcing himself. Reed was in the yard, splitting wood. He was a slight man, 50 or so, with the kind of face that had once been handsome and was now merely precise, thin nose, careful eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, hair gone entirely white. He set his axe down when he saw the sheriff approach and waited with his hands at his sides. "Mr. Reed." "Sheriff." "You've heard." "I've heard." Crow dismounted. He tied his horse at the post by the gate and walked into the yard, taking in the surroundings with the particular quality of attention that was his professional habit, not intrusive, not obvious, simply present. "I'd like to ask you some things." "I expected you would." They sat on the porch. Reed brought water. Crow asked, and Reed answered, and the conversation had the quality of 2 men talking around a third thing that neither had yet named. Reed had known some of the missing. The children, yes, he had taught 2 of them. He had known one of the women slightly, the younger one, a widow named Agnes Farrell who had washed laundry and occasionally traded labor for lodging at the boarding house. He had not known the older woman. "Where were you," Crow asked, "this past March?" "Around the 15th. Reed thought. "Here. I don't go into town much anymore." "You know why? Do you have anyone who can place you here?" A pause. "No," Reed said. "I live alone, Sheriff. As I have reason to." One thing didn't sit right. Crow shook Reed's hand at the gate and rode back toward town. He turned it over as he rode. The sitting wrong thing wasn't Reed's manner, which had been either guileless or very carefully performed. It wasn't his alibi, which was simply absent. It was the hands. The folded hands on those children. Silas Reed was a man of learning, of a certain old-fashioned tenderness. It was possible to imagine him doing that, taking the time, despite everything, to lay small hands across small chests before covering them with soil. It was also possible to imagine someone doing it specifically so Crow would think of Reed. Clara Whitmore wore her wealth the way the Mesa wore its rock, as if it had always been there and the question of its origin was beneath consideration. She was 53 years old, handsome in the broad, deliberate way of women who have decided to stop apologizing for taking up space. She wore dark colors. She sat at the head of her boarding house dining table each evening and presided over it with the quiet authority of someone who understood that the room functioned because she willed it to. She had come to Drywater Ridge in 1877, before the strike, with a deceased husband's modest claim and a talent for seeing what land was worth before others did. By 1883 she held controlling interest in 4 of the 6 significant mining operations on the ridge, all of it done through intermediaries, all of it technically clean. The town knew and did not discuss it. She was Clara Whitmore. The ridge had a way of looking past the things it needed not to see. Crow had known her for 6 years. They were not friends, exactly. They understood each other, 2 people who had each, in their own way, decided that Drywater Ridge was worth something and had shaped their lives around that decision. He went to see her the afternoon after his visit with Reed. She poured coffee herself and set it before him at the small table off the kitchen. It was not the dining room table. She gave people the dining room table when she wanted to perform grace. The kitchen table meant she was willing to be direct. "You'll ask about Agnes Farrell," she said. "I'll ask about all of them. Agnes stayed here twice. Both times she owed money she couldn't pay. Both times I carried it." Clara wrapped both hands around her cup. She was a good woman. Worked hard. Had no luck. She was going to leave town, Crow said. It wasn't a question. A beat of quiet. She talked about it. Most of them do, eventually. The ones who come here alone. The ones without men to anchor them. Clara said it without sentiment. The ridge is not an easy place to be a woman without protection. Did she say where she was going? Albuquerque. She had a sister there. Clara looked at him steadily. Did I think she would actually go? No. The talk of leaving is rarely the leaving itself. Crow said nothing. But she didn't leave, Clara said. She disappeared. She did. A pause. You'll want to look at her account ledger. The one I keep for boarders. I'll get it for you. She stood. She was gone perhaps 3 minutes. When she returned, she handed him a slim leather book without ceremony. He opened it. Agnes Farrell's entries were neat, in Clara's hand, dates of stay, amounts owed, amounts paid. The last entry was dated October 14, 1882. Balance settled in full. Departed. He looked at the entry for a long moment. She settled her balance. Yes. Before she disappeared. Yes. Crow turned the page. The next boarder's entries began directly below. He handed the book back. He thanked her for the coffee. He walked out into the thin afternoon light and stood on the porch of the boarding house and looked down Milliner Street toward the collapsed schoolhouse, where Brunner had placed a simple rope around the rubble to keep people back. Someone had settled Agnes Farrell's account for her. Or she had settled it herself, knowing what was coming. Neither explanation left him comfortable. The weather had shifted without announcement. A dry wind moved off the desert flats, carrying grit that settled in the corners of doorways and against the bases of the buildings. In Drywater Ridge, that kind of wind usually presaged a long stretch of the particular oppressive stillness that the miners called a dead spell, when no rain came and no clouds came and the heat sat on the mesa like a hand pressing down. Crow walked back to the jail. He laid out what he had on his desk as if arranging cards. Agnes Farrell, widow. Had planned to leave. Did not leave. Found in the ground. Marta Schultz, widow, 61 years old. A woman who had arrived in town 18 months ago from no clear origin, lived quietly in a rented room, took in mending. Missing for 9 months. She had not, to anyone's knowledge, planned to leave. Or perhaps she had. And perhaps no one had thought to mention it. The 3 children, boys named Thomas Ives, 7, and Jack Cutter, 9, and a girl named Rosa Mendez, 8. All 3 had been enrolled in Reed School. All 3 had lost a parent to the mines in the year prior to the school's closure. 3 orphan children. 2 widowed women. All of them without anchors. All of them the kind of people a town loses without noticing, quietly, one at a time, in the way that settlement populations always thin at the edges. He put his head in his hands. The town meeting was called by the mining committee, not by Crow, which told him everything he needed to know about the direction of the next few days. It was held in the saloon, the only space in Drywater Ridge large enough to hold 50 people standing. Crow arrived early and stood at the back. He watched them come in, the miners, the shopkeepers, the handful of women who felt safe enough to attend, the men who ran the smaller claims and the men who worked for the men who ran the larger ones. Chester Vane, who chaired the mining committee and whose money was third in the ridge only to Clara Whitmore's and the Consolidated East Companies, stood at the front and spoke with the controlled urgency of a man who wanted action but knew better than to say so directly. "We have 5 of our own in the ground," Vane said. 5 people who lived on this ridge, who worked this ridge, who made this place what it is. And they were put in the ground like refuse. Like things to be disposed of. Murmurs. We know who was around those children. We know who had cause and who had character that leaves something to be desired. And I want to look our sheriff in the eye right now and ask him what he's doing about it. Every head turned toward the back. Crow met Vane's gaze without moving. "I'm investigating," he said. "Carefully. Carefully." Vane repeated the word with mild contempt. "How many more do we need to find in the ground before careful becomes fast enough?" "That's not a fair question and you know it, Chester. Maybe fairness is a luxury we've run out of." The room was with Vane. Crow could feel it, not hostility exactly, but the particular pressure of a crowd that has decided on a direction and is waiting for someone to open the gate. They wanted Silas Reed. They had decided on Silas Reed the way people decide on answers, not from evidence so much as from the relief that answers provide. He understood it. He had seen it before. It didn't make it right. After the meeting, Fenn caught him on the steps. "They want an arrest," Fenn said. "I know. Reed's the obvious one." "I know that too." Fenn was quiet for a moment. He was not a complicated man, was not, perhaps, a subtle one, but he was honest, which Crow valued more than subtlety on most days. "You don't think it's Reed," Fenn said. "I think it might be Reed. I'm not sure it is Reed." "What's the difference between those two things, legally speaking?" "About 20 years of a man's life," Crow said, "if we're lucky. If we're unlucky, it's the difference between a rope around an innocent neck and the guilty man walking free while we all feel satisfied." Fen chewed on that. The children's hands, he said finally. You keep coming back to that. Someone took time with them. That could mean anything. It means something, Crow said. I don't know what yet. His confidant, insofar as he had one, was a woman named Della Marsh, who ran the town's small lending library out of the back room of her husband's dry goods store. She was 45, sharp-tongued, and had the useful quality of knowing everyone's business without participating in any of it. She found him the next morning, which meant she had come looking. You should be careful, she said without preamble. Good morning to you too, Della. I'm serious. The talk is getting ahead of you. By tonight half the town will have Reed convicted, sentenced, and already regretful they couldn't do worse to him. She set a parcel of books on the counter and began unwrapping it with efficient movements. And when that happens, they'll want you to confirm it. And if you don't? I know. Do you? She looked at him directly. You have a habit, Nathaniel, of thinking that being right is the same as being safe. It isn't. Not in this town. Not with Vane already positioning himself as the voice of justice. Vane is playing politics. Of course he is. That doesn't mean his politics won't get someone killed. He started to leave. One more thing, she said. He stopped. Agnes Farrell told me something, about a month before she said that the sheriff had come to talk to her. Had asked her, very kindly, to reconsider leaving. Della set the last book down and looked at him. She said she wasn't sure if he was warning her or threatening her. She thought he was probably just being protective. A pause. But she wasn't sure. The air between them held. She told you that, Crow said. She did. He looked at the books on the counter. He looked at the window, at the street beyond. I appreciate you telling me, he said. He left. He arrested Silas Reed on a Thursday. He did not want to. He had not found enough, not yet, but the pressure had become geological, layered, heavy, moving slowly but with the kind of force that eventually reshapes the landscape entirely. The town needed the arrest. Vane had made it clear, through 2 intermediaries and 1 direct conversation, that if Crow did not act, the mining committee would consider alternative arrangements for law enforcement on the ridge. Which meant they would act without him. Which meant Reed would not survive it. So Crow rode out to the stone house in the morning, and Reed came to the door in his shirt sleeves, and Crow told him he was being taken into custody, and Reed said, I know, and got his coat. He did not resist. He did not argue. He walked beside the sheriff's horse back into town, and the people who saw them stared, and Reed looked at none of them. At the jail, Crow saw him settled in the cell and brought him water and said, more quietly than was necessary, I'm not finished looking. Reed considered this. That's kind of you to say. It isn't kindness. It's honesty. In my experience, Reed said, they're often the same thing. The town was relieved in the way that a body is relieved when a wound is finally drained, the pressure gone, the crisis apparently past, the future returned to the status of manageable. People nodded at Crow on the street. Vane shook his hand. The barber offered him a free shave. He accepted none of it with the ease they expected. The small contradiction had found its way to the front of his mind and would not be dislodged. Agnes Farrell's account, settled in full. No one in Drywater Ridge who knew Agnes Farrell believed she had accumulated the funds to settle her debt, not in the last weeks before her disappearance. She had been between work. Her last paid washing had been in September. Her account had been settled in October. Someone else had paid it. And whoever had paid it had access to Clara Whitmore's ledger, or, more precisely, had an arrangement with Clara Whitmore. He pulled the ledger from his desk. He looked at the entry again. Balance settled in full. Departed. Departed. Not paid by, departed. As if the settlement and the departure were a single act. As if someone had arranged the departure of Agnes Farrell and, while arranging it, had cleared her account, to make the departure look orderly. To make it look voluntary. He sat with this for a long time. Then he stood up and walked to the boarding house. Clara Whitmore met him in the parlor. She was composed, as she always was, but there was something faint beneath the composure, a quality of braced attention that he had not noticed before or had perhaps not looked for. Agnes Farrell's balance, he said. Who paid it? A silence. I did, she said. As charity. You noted it as settled, not forgiven. I see no difference. There is a difference, Clara. One means she paid it. One means you did. If you forgave the debt, you'd note it forgiven. You said settled. She looked at him for a long moment. I may have recorded it imprecisely. You don't record things imprecisely. I've seen your books. Your records go back to 1877. Every entry is precise. A longer silence. She was leaving, Clara said finally. I wanted it to look clean. I didn't want there to be a record of a debt outstanding. If she was gone. If she was gone, Crow said, a debt in a closed account is just a bookkeeping line. No one would care. You cleared it so that if anyone looked, it appeared she had left in good standing. Under her own power. He paused. Why did that matter to you? Her eyes moved. Just slightly. The first time he had ever seen them move that way. I'm not sure what you're suggesting, Sheriff. I'm not suggesting anything, he said. I'm asking. She said nothing. He thanked her and left. He stood outside in the hot wind and looked down the street toward the jail where Silas Reed sat in the cell, probably reading. He had asked for books and Crow had sent to Della for some. He looked at the rope around the schoolhouse rubble. He looked at the sky, which was white with heat and offered nothing. The contradiction had become two contradictions, and two contradictions had become a shape, and the shape was not Silas Reed. It was, in fact, a shape he recognized. And that recognition hit him not with the quality of discovery but with the quality of a door swinging open on a room you always knew was there but had agreed not to enter. He did not go back to the jail. He went, instead, to Della Marsh. He told her what he had been turning over, and she listened the way she always listened, without interrupting, without the small sounds of sympathy or agreement that other people used to show they were paying attention. When he was done, she was quiet for a long moment. You're describing yourself, she said. He had known she would say it. He had needed her to say it. Walk me through it, he said. Agnes wanted to leave. You went to her and asked her, very kindly, to reconsider. She didn't. She's in the ground. Della's voice was even. Marta Schultz, did she want to leave? Her landlord. I need to speak to her landlord. Her landlord is Abe Fowler. He's at the mill until 4. The children were orphaned, with no family in town. Children like that, where do they go? The mission in Santa Fe could have taken them. There was talk of it. I remember, he stopped. You remember what? I arranged for someone from the mission to write. To say they had no current space. That the children would need to remain on the ridge until, he stopped again. The silence in the room was absolute. Until a permanent arrangement could be made, he said, very quietly. Della looked at him. The letter, he said. I wrote the letter myself. He walked back to the jail. Not to Reed's cell. To his own office. He sat at his desk and he looked at his hands for a long time. He was not a man who had acted from cruelty. He understood that. He understood it clearly, and the clarity of it was not a comfort. He had acted from love, or what he had called love. For the ridge. For the town. For the living organism of Drywater Ridge, which he had watched grow from a camp to a settlement to something approaching a community, and which he had watched, over the past 2 years, begin to die. The strike was thinning. The big scenes were played out. The families without men were the first to start talking about leaving, and when they talked about leaving, others heard them and began to think about it, and thinking had a way of becoming doing. He had seen it in other camps. He had watched towns die. The particular death of an abandoned mining settlement, buildings left half standing, streets going to sand, the evidence of human effort swallowed by landscape as if it had never been, that death haunted him in a way he could not fully articulate and had never tried. So he had intervened. Gently at first. Conversations. Encouragement. Help with finances, discreet and deniable. He had created reasons for people to stay, work that appeared, debts that seemed to resolve, opportunities that materialized just when leaving had seemed inevitable. And it had worked. For a while. But some people had seen through it. Agnes Farrell, who was not stupid, had begun to ask questions. Had connected two things that he had connected for her, without meaning to. Had become, in his mind, a problem. He had not planned what happened next. He was certain of that. He had gone to speak with her, to explain, perhaps, or to persuade one final time, and she had told him she was going to tell people what she suspected. That the sheriff had been orchestrating the movements of desperate people. That she was going to Vane. To anyone who would listen. He had not planned it. But he had done it. And after, in the particular silence of after, he had understood that he could not undo it, and that the logic of what he had done had a momentum now that could only be managed, not reversed. Marta Schultz had seen him that night. He had not known until later. The children had been different. The children had been an act of mercy, or what he had told himself was mercy. 3 orphan children alone on the ridge, with no one to care for them and nowhere, truly, to go, in a town that was dying around them. He had told himself it was mercy. He put his hands flat on the desk. He had folded their hands. He had told himself that meant something. He went to the cell and he opened the door and he told Silas Reed to go home. Reed stood slowly, with the careful movements of a man his age who had been sitting on a cot for 3 days. He looked at Crow without expression. Am I free to go? Yes. May I ask why? Because you didn't do it. Reed was quiet. He picked up his coat from the cot and his books from the floor, stacking them with precision. He moved toward the door. He stopped. "I knew some of those children well," he said. "Thomas Ives. He was exceptional. For his age. For any age." He did not look at Crow. "I want you to know that someone knew them. That they weren't only victims. They were people first." "I know," Crow said. Reed left. Fenn arrived 20 minutes later and found Crow still standing by the open cell door. "He's out," Fenn said. "He is." "Then who?" "Sit down, Josiah." Fenn sat. Crow told him. All of it. In the same order he had assembled it himself, with the same lack of drama, as if he were reading a report about someone else. He told him about Agnes Farrell and what she had said she would do. He told him about Marta Schultz, who had seen him. He told him about the children and the letter he had forged and the particular story he had told himself about Mercy. He told him about the hands. When he was done, Fenn sat very still for a long time. "You're confessing to me," he said. "Yes." "Why?" Crow considered. "Because you're the law here now," he said. "If I'm the murderer, I'm not the sheriff." Fenn looked at the floor. At the wall. At the open cell behind Crow. "What do you want me to do?" "What you need to do." Another silence. "Does anyone else know?" "Della Marsh may have worked it out by now. She's quick." He almost smiled. "Clara Whitmore knows some of it." "Not all." "Clara Whitmore." Fenn absorbed this. "She covered for you. The ledger entry." She didn't know what she was covering. She thought it was only the relocation, that I'd been moving people on, not. He stopped. "She may not know the rest. But she'll need to." "Yes." Fenn stood. He was 26 years old and looked, in that moment, 20 years older. "Go in the cell," he said. Crow looked at him. "I mean it, Nathaniel. Go in the cell. Or I swear to God I'll put you there." Crow walked into the cell. He sat on the cot. He heard the door close. The trial, such as it was, lasted 4 days. There was no circuit judge in Drywater Ridge, there never had been, in the way of remote settlements that manage their law through the force of whoever holds it. The closest thing to formal justice arrived in the form of a federal marshal named Treadwell who rode up from the county seat and took depositions and assembled what evidence there was and listened to Crow's own account, which was thorough and without self-pity. The town did not know what to do with what it had learned. Some of them didn't believe it. Chester Vane, in particular, spent a week arguing that Crow had been manipulated, that Della Marsh or Clara Whitmore had planted evidence, shifted testimony, constructed a case. He said it loudly, to anyone who would listen, and for a brief period it seemed like some portion of the town would embrace the comfortable fiction. But Crow's own account, given freely, in full, without qualification, made fiction untenable. He had written everything down himself, the night after he spoke with Fenn. A complete record. He had left it on the desk in the jail and had not asked for it to be returned. Clara Whitmore, when told the full extent of it, had been quiet for a long time and then had said, "He asked me once what I thought would happen to this town in 10 years. She paused. "I told him it would probably be gone. He didn't say anything. He just nodded. She cooperated with the investigation entirely. She paid for 5 headstones. The marshal took Crow south on a Tuesday morning in October. The wind was already moving off the desert, the same dry, purposeless wind that moved through the ridge in the deep summer, carrying grit and erasing things slowly. There were a few people on the street as they rode out. Not a crowd. Some of them looked. Some of them didn't. Della Marsh stood at the door of the dry goods store. She did not wave. She held his gaze as he passed, and in her expression there was something he recognized as grief, which was perhaps the truest thing anyone offered him that morning. He rode south. A month later, the Consolidated East Company pulled its equipment from the ridge. The announcement came on a Wednesday afternoon by telegram. It was, the company representative noted, simply a matter of the seam having exhausted itself. The timing was coincidence. No one entirely believed that. It didn't matter. Within 6 weeks, a third of the town's population had left. Within 3 months, it was half. By spring, Drywater Ridge had the quality of a place that was deciding whether to be a town still or whether to let the decision go. More people left. The question answered itself. Clara Whitmore was the last of the significant ones to leave. She sold what she could and donated the rest and rode out on a gray morning without ceremony. She had bought land in Albuquerque, the same city where Agnes Farrell had meant to go. Whether that was accident or intention, she never said. The jail stood empty for a winter. It was a solid building, stone on the lower third, timber above, with a good roof that the mining committee had repaired twice and that would last another decade before the weather found the weak point and took it. Inside, the cell stood open. The desk remained. Someone had left a lantern on it. On the wall beside the window, where Crow had marked the years in small neat lines, not days, years, the particular habit of a man who measures himself against time, the marks were still visible in the wood. 11 of them. The wind moved through the gap in the eaves with a sound that was almost language, the way wind in an empty place always sounds like something is about to be said. Nothing was said. Outside, the wooden sign that read Drywater Ridge, established 1875, had been taken down and laid against the wall of the building that had been the assay office. Someone would take it eventually, for the wood if nothing else. Lumber was scarce in the desert. Nothing went to waste. The graves were on the east end of town, where the mesa dropped away and the view opened to the full flat measure of the desert below, miles of it, ochre and rust and pale gray, with the particular bigness that the east never quite prepared a person for. 5 stones. The wind moved over them the way it moved over everything on the ridge, without preference, without pause, with the complete indifference of a force that has no knowledge of what it touches. Thomas Ives, who had been exceptional. Jack Cutter, who liked to draw horses in the margins of his school papers. Rosa Mendez, who had her father's eyes and nobody left to remember it. Agnes Farrell, who had known something was wrong and had said so. Marta Schultz, who had seen 5 stones in the thin October soil. And around them, slowly, the desert, patient as it always had been, indifferent as it always would be, came back. They said Nathaniel Crow had been the best sheriff the Ridge ever had. They said it still, sometimes, in the way that people say things that are true and terrible at the same time. He had kept violence out of Drywater Ridge for 11 years. He had kept the peace. He had kept everything. The desert took Drywater Ridge in the end. It takes everything. But some stories deserve to be remembered. Subscribe to make sure we keep telling them.
The town woke up to sirens in the dust, footprints fading where the cold wind passed, a crying woman on the courthouse stairs, holding memories that won't come back. A badge in the dirt, a broken door, whispers drifting through the street. The sheriff kneels beside the truth, but truth don't bring the dead to speak. And the sun keeps rising over empty ground, but nothing here feels the same now. Oh, the night stole more than gold and guns. It stole the hearts of everyone. Mothers praying through their tears, calling names no one can hear. The wind still carries broken cries through these tired western skies. And every soul in this old town knows some wounds never let you go. A father staring at a silent room, boots by the door that won't be worn, a photograph beneath the lamp